So a little background on the Historical Society. We are a nonprofit. We were founded in 1968, and we are unaffiliated with the Township of Middletown. So any type of contributions that you can give us, we greatly appreciate. So besides the speaker series, we offer a number of other resources, one of which is our YouTube channel, where we have original videos, exclusive videos, and also videos of our past speaker presentations. On our website at middletownnjhistory.org, we have a map where we document the development of land throughout the history of the town. You can zoom in and you can see the history. You can see some old newspaper clippings, and we welcome contributions from the public if anybody is interested. On our website, we also have a collection of yearbooks and newsletters, all fully searchable. And the yearbooks are Middletown Township High School from 1922 right now until the mid 1940s, I believe, and we will be expanding that. Also on our website, we now have our archive. This is always growing. We have about 60 items listed right now, but as we keep recataloging everything, we're putting it all online for everybody to see. And like I said, we are a nonprofit. If you're interested in helping us out, we would welcome your membership. There are sign-up forms outside where you can sign up at middletownnjhistory.org. And we also thank our community sponsors, McCormack Farms and Monmouth Timeline, also known as This Day in Monmouth County History, which is run by our speaker tonight. Some upcoming events. July 26th, we'll have Rick Gefkin talking about the Grover family of Middletown. August, we don't have a speaker yet, but we will have one announced soon. September, we'll have Geraldine Thompson, First Lady of New Jersey by Jane Skameka. And in October, we will have Shark Attacks of the Jersey Shore by Pat Heyer. We plan for all those to be in person and online. And as you can see on the screen, there are multiple ways to contact us: website, social media, email. Very easy to get a hold of. And with that, I'm going to pass it off to our programming chairman, Randall Gabrielle.
John Barrows has established a remarkable way of promoting and disseminating local history, perhaps unique in Monmouth County. He established, built, and edits the Monmouth Timeline, a forum for articles of every description, open to all who have an interesting subject, can research it, and write it well. He will talk about one of his favorites. He, of course, writes for his own website, and he has extensive background in both writing and speaking. John has a bachelor's in journalism from Syracuse University, a master's in communication from Rutgers, and extensive experience in public relations and communication for a worldwide organization. In his retirement years, he is working to bring us local history. John also knows how to build an audience, perhaps the largest crowd we've ever had. But as we know, crime sells, and he selected a well-known figure from the world of organized crime. But tonight we're going to hear the domestic story of the Genoveses. John, please tell us about it.
Thank you, Randall, and I'm going to try and make sure you can hear me all the way and back. Can you hear me? Cool. All right, good enough. Thank you very much, Randall and Tom, and thanks to the Middletown Township Historical Society for giving me the chance to be here today and tell you one of my favorite stories that I've come across. We've now published almost 250 stories on monmouthtimeline.org, and this is one of the ones that from the very early days I was fascinated by the notion that one of the most famous figures in organized crime history had lived here, right here in Monmouth County. But I kept tripping over this references to his Middletown mansion, and then there's other reference to his Atlantic Highlands mansion. And I knew enough that there's some neighborhoods where like up in Navesink, where there are homes on a street that all have an Atlantic Highlands postal address, but half those homes pay their taxes to Atlantic Highlands, and the other home, on the other side of the street, they're paying their taxes to Middletown. So sometimes you can have those like somebody can say it's a Middletown mansion, Atlantic Highland mansion. They're talking about one house. So there was nothing else for me to do about it. I start looking into all the mafia books and the histories, and that was when I was really astonished at how very, very little, for the vast amount that has been published about the life of Vito Genovese, almost nothing about his time here in New Jersey, the domestic part of his life. And so I started at the very beginning and reading every newspaper article I could find, all the New Jersey papers that wrote about him, and just started piecing together this incredibly fascinating story that I'm going to relate to you today. And then within a couple of weeks, I realized that just a few months earlier, this is like late 2019, that a podcast had come out called Mob Queens. Now, I wasn't real active in the whole podcast world, so it flew right by me. But fortunately, right at the same time that I was doing all my own research, this podcast came out. And I have to say, very, very thoroughly researched. They hired professional investigators, professional genealogists. And so you're going to hear references to that podcast throughout, because I found that they did some extraordinarily good journalism. So before we go any further, one thing I want to say is this is a story about a family, okay? And there's one thing about families is that they all have secrets, okay? My family has secrets, believe me. There's things that happened in my youth that a lot of people know a little bit about, but almost nobody knows what really happened. And I think most families are like that. There's things you don't talk about. There's things that don't go outside the house. And so what that means is, when we're talking about this kind of a family, there's a lot we don't know and can never know, because we can only go by what they present or what they allow us to see or what we're able to find. So I just want to keep that in mind. That what we're presenting is sort of like a tip of the iceberg, in which there's a vast amount more that's unseeable and unknowable. So with that, let's go. Let's meet our star-crossed lovers. We have Vito Genovese and Giovanni Petillo. Vito is born in 1897, came to the United States in 1913 as a 15-year-old, and like a lot of Italian immigrants, settled in Little Italy and went to work. And of course, almost any job you got in Little Italy in those days might have been somebody that was connected to a organized crime family. Anna was born in 1905, so she's 8 years younger, but she actually came to America a couple of years before Vito. Also lived in Little Italy and went at the earliest age, went to work in restaurants. And they're both from Italy, but they're not just from Italy. They're from the Naples region, but they're not just from Naples. I gotta keep doing this. That red dot there. This is the town where both Vito Genovese and Anna Petillo were born and grew up. Now, this is a modern day satellite map of this town, and look how big it is. Imagine how big it was at the turn of the century. They were fourth cousins. I don't think they knew it at the time, but in the early years, Vito was convicted for a firearms possession and sentenced and spent a little bit of time in jail. That would be the last conviction that Vito Genovese would get until the feds finally sent him away for good when he was in his 50s. Vito married a woman named Donata Aragon, and they had a daughter, Nancy. Anna married a baker named Gerard Bonatico, and they had a daughter named Marie. Donata Aragon died of tuberculosis, or at least that's the story. This is another one of these things where there's some things here that don't quite add up, because if she had tuberculosis, in those days they had TB wards. So these were facilities just for TB patients with TB specialists. Obviously, they were a family of some financial wealth. They were living in a nice mansion in Ozone Park in Queens. And so they had the financial wherewithal. So she could have been treated in a private hospital, but she died in a hotel room under the care of a private doctor. And so there are a lot of people who think that there's a lot fishy about her dying. And she and Vito did not have a particularly good relationship. There was domestic abuse that was witnessed by a lot of people, and infidelity, and so it was not going well. Anna, in the meantime, her marriage isn't going too well either. She files for divorce, but this is another one of these things where there's a discrepancy where on the Mob Queens podcast, their investigators looked at the paperwork and said it was never granted. Whereas the most recent book that came out last year called The Deadly Dawn, the author of that book stated that she was granted the divorce. So there's still some kind of question about what was behind the fact that Anna's husband, Gerard, who was on paper a baker, but everybody knew he was kind of getting involved with illegal liquor in one way or another during Prohibition. So he was getting in on some criminal activities, but he was so small time that for him to have been strangled on a rooftop along with another man who was just in the wrong place at the wrong time, still to this day seems to be a little bit fishy. Joe Valachi would later claim that he ordered that hit carried out at Vito's instructions, but he never knew why, because Vito didn't say, I need you to take care of this guy. Here's why. He just, I need you to take care of this guy, and it got taken care of. So what we know for certain is that Vito's wife died, and Anna's husband died, and 2 weeks later, they got married, and 6 months later, they had a child, Philip A. Genovese. This is future Shrewsbury Board of Education member, Philip Genovese. This is future Shrewsbury Town Council member, Philip Genovese. So you see why I love this story. So the new family needs a new home, and they move into 29 Washington Square West, which is a very nice neighborhood. $180 a month. Their upstairs neighbors, Eleanor Roosevelt, and Anna was working nightclubs, and this is when they buy the Middletown mansion. This is the only known photograph of what at the time was called the Dangler Mansion. So Edward Dangler and his wife bought this property, which is on Red Hill Road in what is now Deep Cut Park, and had that mansion built. It was a property that had one time been part of the Taylor farm many years before. And so it was a Georgian style, and they did not live in it for very long. Edward Dangler took sick and died. They never had children. And I think that's one of the reasons that they didn't take more pictures was, they didn't live there together as a happy couple for very long. And the widow Dangler sold it to someone named Florence Sperling, and Florence Sperling sold it to Vito Genovese. And it was a house that was, when Vito bought it, he immediately started converting it into an Italian villa with a 3-hole golf course and a tennis court, a gazebo that's still there, these fabulous gardens that were planted by Lovett Nurseries of Little Silver. I live in Little Silver, so I always got to get a little shout out there. And just, the incredibly expensive furnishings, just an incredible makeover. And of course, the most famous thing was the working model of Mount Vesuvius, and that is still there. You can still see that, just to prove that this really happened. So Vito, at this time, they're living in New York, and this is their summer home in Middletown. And they're going out on weekends, and it really is supposed to be the weekend home. But at some point, Vito and Anna go to Italy. Now, there's 2 different versions of them going to Italy. There's one version that they went on vacation and she came back and he decided to stay. The other version is that he got a pretty good idea that there was some people who were in custody who were going to be telling stories about him, and he didn't want to be around, so he fled to Italy in advance of murder charges that were eventually brought to Barrows. So he's in Italy in 1943. What's going on in Italy in 1943? American soldiers are still fighting German soldiers in some of the bloodiest battles of World War II. Vito goes back to his homeland, and he sides up to two people right off the bat. Again, where is he from? He's from Naples. Where is the Allied headquarters in Italy? Naples. All of these materials that the Allies are now bringing in to support the Italian campaign, all coming in through Naples. Vito goes right to the Allied forces and volunteers to be a translator. Well, you know, one of the things about the organized crime syndicates in the New York area is we all know that one of their favorite rackets was the shenanigans they engaged in down on the waterfront. Well, what Vito did was he immediately started hiring his people to drive these U.S. Army trucks from the port full of food, full of medical supplies, full of all kinds of things that people out in the Italian village were not getting. And he drove these trucks out to the middle of, to the countryside, probably that little dot we saw. They emptied them up, sold what they could sell on the black market, and gave away stuff to poor people, and then they burned the trucks. There was later, when the Army finally started investigating this, they found one lot out in the middle of nowhere where 40 Army trucks were burned to a crisp. The other thing Vito was doing at this time was he's getting next to the U.S. allies. He's also getting next to Benito Mussolini because, right, well, you got to play both sides of the fence. How's he getting next to Benito Mussolini? Well, he's doing it two ways. There he is in his, I don't know why they gave him a uniform, but that's Benito Mussolini's son-in-law, and he's a cocaine addict. And guess where he's getting his cocaine from? Yes, exactly. And in the meantime, Anna, ever the loyal wife, is making regular trips from the United States back to Italy, carrying suitcases full of cash, as much as $250,000 cash, 1943 style, per trip. And all that money is going to get next to Benito Mussolini. And one of the ways that they were doing was that they were, Vito and some other people were trying to build a palace for the fascists. So he was playing fast and loose on both sides of the fence, raking in a lot of money, but also spending it. Anna, in the meantime, is back in New York. Now, this is when the mansion burns down. So the Middletown mansion burns down while Vito's in Italy under suspicious circumstances. No, really? Some people just have bad luck. Well, the official cause was never formally declared, but the consensus was more or less that it was a faulty furnace. But the contractor, Dominic Caruso, who did all of the improvements and work on the house, he also mentioned that there were numerous subcontractors, electricians, plumbers, all kinds of people going in and out of that property. So there could have been any number of explanations for it. But there was a report that Anna and the kids had made a trip out to the Middletown mansion just a couple days before it burned down. So, you know, there are some people who like to speculate that maybe she cleaned out everything that mattered to her, and Dominic Caruso took everything else of value, and they just cut their losses. Because Anna didn't really want to live there anyway. She loved her job in New York, loved it, and it was the only place she ever really wanted to live. And the only place so her new job, this is a modern day photo of the building that very much still exists. And in the lower level of that was something called the Club 181, because it was located at 181. They didn't have a lot of imagination about naming these things, but when they say it's the East Side's gayest spot, they are not talking about a place of mirth and happiness. This is a drag club. This is a nightclub of transvestites. That means that the people who look like waiters are actually women dressed as men, and the entertainers on the stage are men dressed as women. And this is at a time when this is all against the law. So it's exactly the kind of thing the mob would do to make money. And these nightclubs were hugely popular. Celebrities, government officials, pro athletes. It's like there was no stigmatism. This was a big deal at the time. It came out of something, you can look this up, called the pansy craze of the 1930s. So coming out of the roaring 20s anything goes, right? You know, women are wearing dresses where you can see their legs below the knees. And, you know, this notion of men dressing like women and then going out and partying and having a good time just became a thing. And, you know, this was Anna's crowd. These were Anna's people. And she was considered one of the great nightclub owners. And those nightclubs made lots and lots of money. So Vito finally comes home, and he comes home. You have to have proof that there really was a man named Orange C. Dickey. And he was a baker before he got into the war. But when he got into the war, when he joined the army, he ends up in the criminal investigation division, because that's, of course, where bakers go, right? And he is investigating the black marketeering that's going on in Italy. And he finally, you know, is able to piece together that one of their translators is probably the guy behind it all. And eventually he is able to place Vito under arrest. Then he has to get somebody in New York interested in bringing Vito home. And that wasn't so easy, because you have to remember, the whole world is at war. American soldiers are dying in all kinds of places around the world by the incredibly painful, tragic numbers. Who cares about one guy who killed one guy? This is kind of, you know, everybody's got so much more to worry about. But Orange C. Dickey was not going to be dissuaded. And he supposedly was offered $250,000. You can imagine one of those suitcases full of cash Anna brought with him to look the other way. He wouldn't do it. So eventually people in New York arranged for Vito to be brought back. And so Orange C. Dickey and Vito were shackled together, and they took a boat ride back to New York. And Vito went on trial for murder, and the charges were dropped because the witness died while in custody. You know, it just, you know, this witness had some health problems. He had some daily meds that he took, and somebody was able to swap out his meds, and he took a pill or a capsule, I'm thinking, that the coroner later said had enough poison to kill 6 horses. So the charges are dropped. Vito skates again, and now he's home. And what is he going to do? He's coming back to New Jersey. This is the only known photograph that's out there that's supposedly of the 130 Ocean Boulevard house in Atlantic Highlands. That's not 100% confirmed. If you look at the current home on Zillow or Google Earth or something like that, it could very well be. It could very well be. It looks like it's embedded into the hill overlooking Raritan Bay. Has this very sort of limited in and out access, so it's very safe for someone who's a little paranoid. And unlike the Middletown mansion, which was a weekend plus, this is where their family is going to live year round. So Vito and Anna live here with their kids, and now their kids are growing up and having grandchildren. So they have grandchildren over their house all the time. And it's just pretty much like you would think, like most normal households. Now, Vito never really didn't really leave the house when they were in Middletown. They pretty much just stayed at the mansion. But when he was in Atlantic Highlands, he was a man about town. He was known to get his hair cut at the same barber, always left a $1 tip. You know, anytime the kids came around asking for money for the Cub Scouts, he always gave a donation. He stopped by the fire station, chat up the boys, give them a little bit of money for the fund. And he had some of his relatives owned the piano bar in Long Branch, and so that was a hangout. So he was out and about and was seen. But there's something about that that turns out to be a little bit of a work, because Joe Valachi testified that when he decided he was going to move to New Jersey, that Vito said, "Okay, but let me give you some advice on how you do this. Don't get involved with the locals. Be seen, be nice, but in other words, don't make any friends, don't join anything, you know, and just, you know, and for whatever you keep your nose clean." Because the whole question about why come to New Jersey comes up, and there's a couple different schools of thought. One school of thought is that successful men in Italy always had summer villas outside the city where their offices or their factories or their their businesses were, and that was just a thing you did when you achieved a certain level of success. Other people noted that a number of other major organized crime figures were all putting a state border between their crimes and their residences. Okay, so we're talking about a time when the federal government didn't take an active interest in organized crime. And the history of the FBI, of course, is it's bank robbers, and then it's German saboteurs, and then it's communists and whatever. They don't get around to caring about the mob for a while, and eventually, a lot of these mob leaders realize if you live in the same state where your crimes are being committed, you are going to be a target for state prosecutors and investigators. But if you just live across the river, well, now you're a resident of the state of New Jersey and you haven't committed a crime. So those prosecutors don't have anything. And so the reason, so those are the two schools of thought. And I think they can both be true at the same time. So along the way, Vito's making just gobs of money through all his different rackets, the Italian lottery, owns a dog track, all kinds of different things. But things are not going well. That's what we later find out. They're not going well. We don't really know what to make of this episode. This is the only known photograph of Philip Genovese, and it's from Vito's funeral. All we know is that Vito and Phil were in a car on Route 9 in Freehold. They got into a serious accident. And a number of passengers in the other vehicle suffered very severe injuries. Nobody died, but the other family sued Vito and Philip. And the case got tossed out of court because some lawyers just didn't do their job right. There doesn't seem to be any shenanigans from Vito. But the point is that 2 days after Anna moved out. So there was a straw that broke some kind of camel's back at this time. What it was, we're not really sure. But that was when Anna moved out, and she filed for something called separate maintenance. Now, separate maintenance was a thing that existed in an era where the idea was to keep married people married, even if they were separated. So a couple could be separated, but the husband was still obligated to provide financial support, and sometimes the court had to set that. So that's what separate maintenance. So she's suing not for divorce, but for separate maintenance. And then she withdraws that suit, and Vito agrees to pay her money, and then he doesn't. So then she gets really ticked off, and then she files for divorce, and he countersues for divorce, and it all goes to court, in the family court in Freehold, where Anna, and that's Anna in her classic style, she always looked immaculate, testified in open court for 2 full days, where she ripped the lid off of the entire organized crime. She talked about all of Vito's, she said, the famous quote, Vito has his sticky fingers in all the rackets. And she detailed how he's making 20 grand a week off the Italian lottery. And how he's skimming the receipts off of a horse track in Virginia. And he's got things going on at the docks, and he's got this going on. 2 full days. It was astonishing. There was packed with reporters. There were TV news crews there. This was national news. It had never happened before. And that's Vito at the Freehold court. He looks pretty scared, doesn't he? Right? He looks worried. Well, on day 3, Vito got to have his witnesses testify. And he had 23 witnesses that refuted every single accusation that Anna had made, including his daughter by Donata Ragone. Nancy actually testified for Vito that Anna was making all this domestic violence stuff up. She was making up all this stuff about the kissing contest, making up all this stuff about people offering Vito underage girls. And the case gets thrown out. The judge essentially decides, I'm not giving either of you, neither of you have proven anything. So they go through all of that and walk out with nothing. And everybody still isn't really sure if Anna was telling the truth or not. This is where there's a lot of stories we get from the Mob Queens podcast from grandchildren. And this is where the normalcy of the family and the kind of people that they were comes through, where it's a lot. And this is one of the best parts of that podcast, is the whole bunch of stories of like my Nana this, my Nana that, where you just can tell that if you put all this other salacious stuff aside, there was just, family doing what family does. And so there's home movies that you can see that are out there that show a little bit that, Anna at the Atlantic Highlands home, which, by the way, that does look a lot like the detail from the house we saw before. And so at any rate, they're now separated, and Vito is still living in the mansion at Atlantic Highlands. But following all that testimony, he has basically told the judge that he only makes $120 a week from his scrap paper business, but he can't support that with the lifestyle he's clearly and obviously living. And so the judge gives him permission. And so Vito has to auction off all of the valuables from the mansion. He has to sell the mansion. And so the end for Vito comes with the famous Appalachian meeting. This is a huge gathering of mafia leaders from all across the country, and they decide to meet in this tiny little town in upstate New York. And one of the things that tipped off the local authorities was when one of the local marketers, was surprised by how much meat and beef they had to bring in for this event that was happening at this rich person's house. This guy's going to feed a lot of people some big steaks. We don't usually get that. So everybody knew something was going on. And when the day it happened, all these cars are driving in from all of these. So Vito's in a car with 4 other mafia leaders from New Jersey. And the state police realizes something's going on. They start setting up roadblocks around the place, and they just pull people over and say, "Who are you? And what are you doing? Can I see some ID?" And some people freak out and run, and they get arrested for not complying. Vito's way too smart, and he just says, "Well, we're going to visit a sick friend." Nobody faced any arrests. Nothing really came out of that, except that law enforcement types now knew who were the leaders of organized crime for all the major cities, and understanding they're all interconnected, they're all working together. They'd never known that before. This is when the feds realized we really have to get more involved in this. And so the one federal division that was focusing on organized crime was not the FBI, but it was something called the Federal Bureau of Narcotics. And they were setting up stings because the mafia had gotten into heroin and cocaine, which certain the famous figures of mafia history, the Lucky Lucianos of the world, were dead set against it. We should never get into the drug business. But they said, well, if we don't, someone else will. Anyway, so there's a sting. There's some people who are arrested. They flip and testify, become state's evidence. And all of a sudden, they're placing other people at the scene of the crime who may or may not have been there, including Vito. Vito gets ratted out by somebody for something that he probably didn't do, because he wasn't that stupid. He didn't get his hands dirty. He worked through proxies, levels of proxies. And that's why he never, got caught up. But now somebody who was saving his own skin said Vito was there at that, when that deal went down, and he gets convicted and he gets sent to prison in a federal prison in Atlanta. If you've ever heard this kind of a story about with the mafia leader who still runs the mafia from his prison cell, that's our boy. All right, he gets to Atlanta. They give him the nicest cell there is. It's still iron bars, but it's a cell that's almost like a suite that can hold several people, and it has a little common area. And so he's allowed to handpick his roommates. So he's got all his made men lieutenants who have also taken a hard fall and are in the federal pen. And he's still running his rackets from the federal penitentiary. And one of the people who ends up in that cell with him is Joe Valachi. Now, how close are these guys? Oh, Vito was best man at Joe Valachi's wedding. Okay, so they know each other. And so Joe Valachi has been arrested. He is on narcotics charges. He's in the same cell with Vito in Atlanta. And Vito, but the feds, the authorities still kind of come, and every now and then they'll say, okay, you come on, and they'll take somebody out for more questioning. Well, somehow Vito gets the notion that Joe Valachi is ratting on him. He wasn't. Joe Valachi finds out that Vito's thinking this, and this is when there's this famous episode that apparently really happened, because there were a number of witnesses there, where in that jail cell, Vito goes up to Joe Valachi and kisses him on both cheeks, the kiss of death. And that's a sign that Joe Valachi has been marked for assassination. So now he's walking around that prison, with his head on a swivel, and he swears he sees a guy coming up who's going to just a Joe Valachi. So he's a guy coming up on him that he thinks is going to do the job. And he manages to get his hand on a pipe, because that's the kind of prison that the Atlanta Federal Pen was, with apparently loose pipes hanging around where someone could just pick one up. So anyway, Joe Valachi turned around and just killed this guy on the spot. And of course, it turns out it was mistaken identity. So he killed the wrong person. Now he's dead meat on a murder rap. And this is where the betrayal part comes in, because there had to be some sense of betrayal for Anna to want to go on court and spill everything like that. She must have felt betrayed. He obviously felt, Vito had to feel betrayed when she said all those horrible things about him. Joe Valachi felt betrayed by Vito, because he felt that Vito was violating the code by setting him up to be rubbed out when he hadn't violated the code. So he's like, well, you know what? As long as I'm going down, I'm going down, and I'm taking him down with me. And so that's when Joe Valachi started testifying. And Joe Valachi was said to have a photographic memory. He testified day after day after day, starting in the Westchester County Jail. But he said, get me out of here, because everybody knows Westchester County Jail is where you guys take the snitches. I won't last 6 weeks here. So they take Joe Valachi to the Monmouth County Stockade. It's about 10 miles from Vito's mansion. This is in a part of the country where there's a whole lot of Genovese relatives and friends and associates. And there's the guy who's absolutely ratting out not just Vito, but the entire La Cosa Nostra. That's where that phrase comes from. We know from Joe Valachi's testimony. That's one of the only photos anyone's ever been able to find of the sites. The confined. Only the Army can take something we all know as the stockade and call it the confinement center. But that's where he was held up. And his testimony was so important that Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the United States Attorney General, came to that facility to talk to Joe Valachi personally and get a sense for his credibility. Now, what happened with Joe Valachi's testimony was his lawyer, guy you may have heard of, F. Lee Bailey. See why I love this story? You just can't make this stuff up. F. Lee Bailey negotiated this incredible deal for Joe Valachi where his testimony couldn't be used against him. So he was going to be in prison the rest of his life, but he wasn't going to go to the electric chair, and he was going to be in some kind of protective custody. Eventually, Valachi testified before Senate and some highly broadcast Senate hearings, and that led to more government involvement in trying to knock down the organized crime. And so after moving out of the Atlantic Highlands mansion, Vito moved into a small frame house on the corner of Avenue C and in Atlantic Highlands. And that house is still there. It's small, it's a 2-bedroom, 1-bath rental, $100 a month. And he was living there when he got arrested. That was his last residence. But he after the whole Valachi thing went down, Vito got transferred to Leavenworth, the federal prison in Leavenworth, where he was no longer allowed to do anything, pretty much. And he died there he essentially natural causes. Meantime, Anna is still back in New York City doing what she loves more than anything else. And so there's a Club 82 is her newest club. And she's putting on some spectacular shows. Each show nightly costs $25,000 for costume, for the orchestra, for the special effects, the fireworks, all the special stuff that they did for every show. This was a real high level entertainment. And something else is happening with Anna is that, she's leading her life, but in a slightly different way. So that's a picture of Anna with the whole gang at Club 82. And so again, everybody that looks like a woman is a man, and everybody that looks like a man is a woman. And in the far right, or the lower right, where you see the circle around the sharp-dressed person, that's a person named Jackie, who went by the name Duke, and she was Anna's lover and partner throughout the latter years of her life. Anna was a bisexual, and a lot of people knew it. But nobody ever seemed to use that against her. But she was thought to have been, I mean, she took care of these people like they were family. One of the things Vito testified about in family court and freehold, just to give his sense on, like, just, my innocent angel wife, that she once broke up a situation where a couple of sailors were were hassling one of her employees, and she was said to have broken that up with a bar stool. So she was not to be trifled with. And apparently the fights that she and Vito had were epic. But again, isn't that just, that's just family, right? So what, so many questions about Anna. She ends up living, she dies at age 88 of natural causes. After she testified in freehold, national columnist Dorothy Kilgallen, who's sort of Howard Stern of her day, TV, radio, newspapers, wrote a column that said that Mrs. Genovese better take extra caution when crossing the road, as it is very likely that she may not, be around very long, whatever. Well, she was. And there's all kinds of questions about, was Anna an informer? Let me do that. Was she, because after she testified in freehold, she got called to testify over and over and over again by other grand juries, special blue ribbon panels looking into corruption, whatever. And in all of those hearings, she claimed she didn't know anything about how Vito made his money. She refuted her own testimony and said, well, I know that's what I said, but I'm telling you now. So all of that makes it, again, kind of a head scratcher. But for example, in the Mob Queens people filed a FOIA request with the FBI, and what they actually got was a heavily redacted version of Vito's FBI file. Now they know that Anna had to have her own file, but one was not. And the expert on these things that they hired said there's only one reason. That's because Anna's file is in the witness file, which never, the FBI never releases the files on people who gave any kind of witness testimony. And again, sort of, maybe she was talking to someone at the Narcotics Bureau. There's some people who think she may have actually had some involvement with getting Vito set up. Here's a curious one. Was she testifying in secret to the state of New Jersey? Because the guy who was her lawyer for her divorce was the assistant attorney general for the state of New Jersey. In a divorce court? Yeah, nobody had ever heard of that before. So there's a lot of questions that we'll probably never know the answer to about what Anna was up to. But one of the things that's fairly compelling, again, a lot of this comes from the Mob Queens podcast because the grandchildren knew of this, was that she was spending time with Mario Puzo, the author of The Godfather. And of course, Mario Puzo always said, when writing this famous book, I never talked to a made man. He never said anything about a mob wife. And you think about that book and the movie, and what is it that most people tend to remember as most memorable about it was not only so much all the guns and bullets, but, right, the family, the domestic stuff, right? And just to give you some comparison, so that's the wedding scene in The Godfather. Well, that's the wedding scene when Vito and Anna threw a wedding for Anna's daughter. And those are the party favors. That's a 7-story cake. You see an entertainer, as lavish ever gets. And I think there's a lot of reason to believe that that's probably the case. She wouldn't have been the sole source, but she probably was a source for an awful lot of this kind of color and flavor. And so Anna soldiers on. Eventually, Club 82 gets shut down. So she takes over as the new social director at the Tony Warwick Hotel in Midtown Manhattan. She's the guest relations manager. And there's a famous person living at that Warwick at the time, Cary Grant. She and Cary get, so every time she comes home, the grandchildren are all hearing about what her friend Cary told her about today. And so that was her life. And then like I say, she ends up dying, and she's buried there in the same tomb as Vito and Donata. And it's in Queens, and it's obviously it doesn't say any individual names on it. So that is it. If you have questions, you're gonna need to stand up and you're gonna have to talk real loud so I can hear you. Yes, sir. So the question is, have I investigated a lot of the wider Genovese family? And the answer is no. Pretty much my focus was on Vito because he's the most famous figure. And when we get into some of the latter day people, they're much smaller in scale, much lesser in impact. And I really, they're not really part of history. They're part of news. And I can't say that somebody won't eventually emerge, but no, I have not been looking wider into it. And that's my sense with Philip Genovese, for example. If I thought I saw Philip Genovese in the supermarket, I would leave him alone. I'd have 1,000 questions, but I wouldn't even ask a single one of them because I would want to respect his privacy. Yeah, well, and Thomas Calandrello, who was banned from working on the Navy Pier following a hearing that Anna testified in. So everybody who was a peer of Vito is in the timeline. But in terms of these following generations, no, I've never gone into that. The supposition is, of course, was that Atlantic Highlands was very, very famous during Prohibition as a place that was friendly to people who were on the wrong side of things in terms of having a view of Raritan Bay, a lot of limited access roads in and out, a lot of secret tunnels. But that's all speculation. We don't know for sure. Hang on, let me get this on the Zoom. Yeah, the question was, how close were Anna and Dorothy Kilgallen? And I don't think they even knew each other. So what she was saying is that one of our members in the audience just lived 4 houses away from Vito and remembers him well when he was alive, and said that the people of Atlantic Highlands loved Vito. And part of the reason why was because of his generosity, that he donated so freely to charities, and in particular, he gave a lot of money to St. Agnes's Church. And by the way, St. Agnes's Church is where he's buried. Or I'm sorry, where his funeral took place. I'm sorry. Okay, now I'm mobile. I'm really dangerous.
When I was a kid, I'm 78. My grandparents had a bungalow on Fay Street in the Waterwich section of the Highlands. You could look straight up, and that's where Vito Genovese's home was. On the beach, and 4 or 5 of his bodyguards would wear a tuxedo.
On the beach.
They would be on the beach. My sister, who was 2 years younger than me, maybe I was about 6 or 7 at the time, I would say to the fellas, we had a little rowboat, help the children with the boat, and they'd pull the boat down the sand, put it in the water, stand and watch us. And then when we're all done, after an hour or so, he would give my sister oranges and apples and a rose. We'd go back up to my grandmother's. She'd go, "Where'd you get that?" "Oh, from that nice man down there with the suit." And she'd go, "Oh my God, stay away from them."
That's a very typical story. Any other questions? Oh, you're okay. Hang on. Let me get to.
Not a question, but a comment. You wondered how Genovese got an Army uniform. I think it was stolen because it didn't fit.
Yeah, that's possible. Anything.
Did Genovese's children attend school in Atlantic Highlands?
Yes.
They did.
Yeah, they all did. Oh, Red Bank.
Red Bank.
Red Bank. Yeah, Philip went to school in Red Bank.
So the public school.
Yes. Sir. Yes, sir.
What year did he die?
Again, dates. You think somebody who runs a timeline that's based on dates? It's 1969. Yeah.
Are his children still alive?
Nancy, Philip is still alive. Nancy, Marie are deceased.
Oh,
In like the 70s and 80s.
so Nancy was the daughter of Vito, but not the daughter of Anna, correct?
Yes, that's right. Vito and Donna's dial, and Nancy and Marie was the Anna's and Gerard's daughter.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
I've heard that J.A. Hoover denied it was organized. And him and Genovese.
Not that anyone knows. Again, it was more just that they didn't know what was going on, and so he was Hoover was the person who was like, if I don't know about it, and it's not important. And
Yeah,
because they missed the boat completely on that until that was like Appalachian. They had clue.
Now, there's talk
That I don't know about. Story for another. Long gone. Things to check on was the old stockade. From where?
Went to the farm. My husband was 9 years old, and he had two henchmen with him with the broads on his shoulders. And they were peeking in the car to see if there was any guns.
Friend's mother cleaned the house for Genovese in Middletown.
Was that right?
And I would go and play outside. We were not allowed in the house. And my
There's
brother,
a lot of expensive breakable things.
and my brother filled in the pool. They asked him to bulldoze it at the end after everything was settled down there. And he kept looking for bones. He said it looked like a cemetery around the pool. There was no buildings, just flat grass.
Did the Genoveses donate the property to Middletown?
No. After Vito came back and he was living in Atlantic Highlands, the question was who donated the Middletown property to the Parks Department. Actually, Vito ended up selling property to Dominic Caruso, the man who did all the improvements. Caruso flipped it to somebody else. It changed hands about a couple more times, and then so it was another party. Yes.
Jersey.
Okay.
That he don't- take care of the Boy Scouts and all whatever, so he was a man of the community.
Yes, he was.
She was like 9 years old. Kids ice cream.
Questions? Yes, ma'am.
And having the last name Genovese, it was very crazy.
Now, sometimes that had
That
to get
was
the good
good.
restaurant table, didn't it?
And sometimes people just looked at me.
Oh, yeah.
But they knew that name.
Yeah.
It was incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people named Genovese who've
Now.
never been in an organized crime
Exactly.
family in their entire lives.
Try to promote any nightclubs on the Jersey Shore here when they were in Atlantic?
Strictly New York City.
Okay. And how did she get back and forth? Did they
Oh,
train? Did they take a boat across?
No, they
Like-
drove.
Oh, they drove.
Yeah,
Okay.
through the Holland Tunnel.
Oh, okay. Okay.
It
All
was a
right.
long drive too.
Yeah,
back
I
in those
thought
days.
maybe they had a yacht and would bring them back and forth.
Yeah. Hour
Yeah.
and a half drive to get.
Yeah. Yeah.
Did Vito ever Capo in the mob, or what? Did he ever?
He was in the Luciano family.
So he had to do some dirty work then.
Oh, well, of course, what he did was he arranged for the dirty work. It was dirty. Drove a lot. Started out as a soldier. When Luciano got deported after his trial, that's when Joe Colombo and Vito each sent to replace Lucky Luciano. The next thing that happens is Vincent to change Gonti to assassinate Colombo, but the bullet just grazes. Joe Colombo says,